You smell that? When you scroll by this YouTube channel, you can smell the bakery of this bread that's being delivered. You know, I used to drive by the bread, store or the bakery, and you could just smell it. I don't know, did you ever have that experience? They had Gardner's Bakery when I grew up. It was on East Washington Avenue in Madison. So we'd drive by, and you could, within 100 yards from that place, sometimes even further, you could take in the aroma of all that hot, fresh, just yeast rising in the oven. That was the bread. Well, the moment you even see the thumbnail of this video, your spiritual senses are going to pick up the smell of this bread that I'm going to be delivering today. I want you to stay tuned. I want you to stay for the whole thing. I know a lot of people are busy, and it's a lot to ask for more than 3 minutes on a video, maybe 7, 15 if it's really a lengthy course that you're going through. But I'm going to ask you to stay for the whole time. Each piece that I'll bring to you today will put together the puzzle for you. And this puzzle will be the thing that allows you to mentally integrate what Mary Baker Eddy called the science of healing, the adaptation of thought so that it tunes in and aligns with spiritual insight. And that spiritual insight brings about its own reflection, which brings about its own manifestation. All right, I won't be able to look you in the eye because I'll be driving here, but I'm just going to leave the camera just parked right here. I want to talk about, it's called Operation Mind Crime. Remember the old Queensryche album? Amazing album if you like rock and roll. And the song, how timeless is that song? It's exactly what started to happen in, late 2019, 2020. This whole, Stasi type Orwellian wet dream nightmare kind of blanketed the whole earth. It's like every demon from CERN was released and set free to torment everyone and everything, right? Okay, we got that. We've been through that. What do you do about it? That's the point. This is what's useful. What do you do about it? Hey, you know what? Your heroes have been talking for years that they're going to save you, and none of it ever happened, okay? Nobody stopped any of this so-called agenda, has done anything useful, all right? All they've done is just get everybody to raise their hand that really opposes it and then identify themselves as targets who are opposing it. If you think about it, that's ultimately quite a disservice. What can you do about it? What will you do about it if you knew what God knew? That's the question. Here's what came to me. It's literally a frame of thought. You know how they say, what is your frame of thought? Well, when you take a movie still, they're made of picture image frames. Picture image frames, those are archetypal patterns. They're blueprint templates, if you will. The light has to come through those templates to animate that simulation in front of your lying human eyes so that you can observe something that looks like it's happening, but it's not. It's nothing more than pixels. It's nothing more than light reflecting. Now, all of the ancient mystics and Gnostics and seers and sages and psychotics, you name it, throughout the centuries have all pierced through the veil. The ones who have said that everything is light, even Tesla. That was one of his most famous legacies that he left the world. Everything is light. Light must radiate through its own creation to animate what you call the phenomenal world. There's a Vedic saying, I go back to it quite often. It says, spirit curves within itself to experience itself as spirit, mind, and matter. And then I also say infinite worlds appear and reappear in the vast expanse of consciousness, like motes of dust dancing in a beam of light. Well, those motes of dust dancing, they're always in a constant flux, in a constant swirl, forming and shaping and reforming and reshaping. Now, the reality is that you live in a multiverse right now where all of these constant fluctuations in the quantum field, if you will, are fluctuating in and out of existence, flickering in and out of existence. 1 millimicrosecond, whatever it is, it's here. The next, it's not. Where is it? Well, it's a non-local field. It's anywhere and everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. Pierce it down even lower, it's sound, it's frequency, it's energy, it's vibration, and pierce it down even lower, it's light. It's light. All is contained within the light. Well, what is darkness then? Well, darkness is a void of light. It's a void of light. If you take the movie and you take the still images and all of the snapshot picture images, now remember, the phenomenon that's happening is that the activity of life swirling within itself to experience itself is constantly molding and reshaping like motes of dust dancing in the light. It's moving. It's inertia and rest all at the same time. But you take a snapshot image, here it is, and you begin to look through that image of thought and project with the light of your conscious awareness. Hence what light is, awareness. You begin to project with your light, your lamp, your conscious awareness begins to focal point. It begins to create a narrative. It begins to create a hypnosis based on whatever meme happens to be passing through the subjective, individualized perception of that form. Example, I see a truck driving here and I see the yield sign and he has a Staples, the corporation Staples office supply, whatever, all over his truck, right? If I look at that snapshot in time, it doesn't really mean much to me at all. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't have a meaning. It's phenomenon in time and space. I can just become aware of it and I can let it go and I can let it pass on to its next destination with no hesitation. But if 2 weeks ago I saw on the hypnosis box, the media screen, that, there was a group of vigilantes who have stolen all of the Staples trucks and, they're out here and they're, releasing EMP weapons and taking out people. And they created this mass hysteria within the collective, which means they created ripples in the wave of the ocean of thought. My perception becomes quite jaded the minute I see that Staples truck passing through. Now, it doesn't really have a meaning until I give it one. But now I've just given it a meaning. And where did I get that meaning from? Well, I took it by proxy from outside of myself through some other condition of matter, which had qualities of good and evil ascribed to it. It was already prepackaged and ready to go, like a ready-to-go meal, right? Here you go, fresh out of the microwave. It's all ready for you to consume. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. We gave you the narrative. It's healthy because we said so. Eat it. Eat of this life. Eat of this bread. They're trying to feed you their bread, trying to feed you their tree of good and evil. That's the snake in the garden. The suggestion from the snake in the garden is eat of this good and evil. We've just given this thing evil powers. because we've imprinted you. We flashed a picture image screen in front of your light, your awareness, conscious awareness. And we got you to create it with your light. Your light created it by putting your focus on it and then looking through the narrative ascribed within it of powers of good and evil and conditions of matter and persons, subjectively minds mingling and competing with each other, and a hostile attack coming from out there, this human belief in two powers, good and evil. We got you to create that. And now you get to be subject to your own judgment that you've ascribed to that. Now your own fear has come upon you. So your fear has come upon you. What are you going to do about this? Okay, let's look at some ideas and let's start to conceptualize a new way of perceiving who we are and how we relate to what I call divine substance, which is life itself. Eternal, immutable, unchangeable, by the way. Now, I want you to hold on to the word unchangeable as we go through this. Just keep thinking in the back of your mind, unchangeable good, unchangeable good, unchangeable good. All right. Now, I remember one time Bashar said, circumstances don't matter, state of being matters. I thought that was pretty important. The state of beingness, what your state is. Another time I, heard something in one of Deepak Chopra's healing audios that said it is the interpretation that we give, in other words, what we ascribe as the meaning, that ultimately determines what happens next, in terms of how this goes. It's the interpretation we're making. And then, the Bible talks about the judgments we make. We make judgments and it comes back upon us. Well, these are all the same ways of looking at it, slightly different, same outcome. We want to be expressing certain qualities and experiencing the reflection of those qualities as our manifest experience. Case in point, I will give you an example here. I read the story last night of a man who was a Christian Scientist, and he had invested a large sum of money. In fact, I think it was all the money he had into a certain business. And it really didn't turn out too well. The investment was unfruitful for him. And he had to go to his lawyer and said, well, nothing can be done here. You're going to lose everything on this deal. And then I guess the judge was reported to say that this thing is a total bust. He's never seen anything more of a bust. Like, in other words, an entirely hopeless situation, entirely hopeless. What's he going to lose here? Well, it's not that bad. It's just money. At least it's not his life. And what he comes to the realization of is he talks to another practitioner and he asks this person, what do you think? They said, you keep looking at the outer and you keep examining evidence from the outside and trying to change that. Why don't you look inside and look at how your thoughts are relating about this business, about you, about things that are going on inside of you? And he noticed he had this great sense, this great personal sense of loss and hopelessness that had been going on for a long time regarding some prior incident that happened. So he was carrying around this state of being, of being relatively hopeless and at a loss. And yet he was engaging through that state in a seemingly new capacity, totally unrelated, and yet same outcome. All different characters involved, all different everything, not even related whatsoever, but same outcome that matches the template. It matches the template that he is shining his light through. So what is he doing? And what is the What is the way out of this madness? Okay, another story. I refer to it again and again. My dear friend Lona, who got bit by a deadly scorpion, and to paraphrase her whole transformation here, immediately the symptoms had come upon her, and she said it was looking quite grotesque, and she turned to a truth that she remembered about God being a spirit in John 4 verse 14, I think, somewhere along there, and man being made in the image and likeness of God, which means man is spiritual. Well, spirit can't be infringed upon by anything material because they never coincide, they never touch, and a spiritual idea has not a single element of error. And this truth, when understood, properly removes whatever is offensive. So she took that thought as her meaning. She took the meaning of the phenomenon. Okay? It was essentially meaningless, but she had an opportunity to give it meaning. She could have said, that's it, I'm dead, it's over, and she would have died. Most likely. Because everybody's supposed to die from a fatal scorpion bite. But she didn't do that. First of all, she did not step into fear, because fear actually is a contract. If you fear something, you are revering it. You are giving another god your affection. I know it's hard to think of fear and affection in the same tongue, but essentially when you fear someone or something or some condition or some idea that has seemingly godlike power, and most assertively it says it's going to hurt you or harm you, you're giving another god your affection. And that breaks the first commandment. No other gods. So she did not break the first commandment. She held to a trust that God was preserving her life. That it wasn't her job to preserve her life. Her job was to know God, to know the truth, and let the truth do its job, do its work. It's not your job to heal yourself. God holds you intact. And just let that truth, when understood, properly remove whatever is offensive. Interesting. Well, back to the first guy. The first guy in the story, his business, terrible investments, lost all his money. He started to look at these ideas of loss, and it came to the recognition that, well, he's God's reflection, and he can only reflect God's goodness and God's abundance and God's wealth and God's right thinking and God's high esteem, God's good moral character. He started to clean up all of these peripheral misperceptions. He started to tidy up the meaning and therefore change the template. The meaning is the template, and the state is the quality of being that's coming through that template. So you fix the meaning by citing what is true according to a principle. Now, the principle is the light itself. Light is the principal thing. Wisdom is light. Light is the principal thing. Principle means it really is the activity in charge. It is the governing element. Everything else is governed by the principle. The light is what gives you the capacity to see the movie. The projection of all of these bits of information, pixels dancing before your lying human eyes that look, they're pixels. It's just information, but it looks like human beings and car bombs and crashes and all these avatars and things. You see these things through the folly of human reasoning. It's light and energy and information. Everything is light, energy, and information. So we understand the principle is light. What does the principle have as its qualities and attributes? Because if we get in agreement with that, we become into accord with it, then we're of one mind. We're of a sound mind. We know that goodness, patience, peace, kindness, gentleness, humility, faith, hope, love, trust, these are all facts of the timeless, eternal, unchanging good that I told you to hold on to. This unchanging good contains all of these expressions. And again, it's unchanging. It's forever, eternal. Hallelujah. Thank God. Praise God. Praise Jesus. Praise God. Whatever you want to do, just get happy in your heart, because it's not up to you to make something happen that already is. It's up to you to reveal what already is through the correct sight in your human perception, if you will, changing what you ascribe as the narrative that's playing out, and then reforming yourself through the change in attitude that causes the shift in consciousness to come through you as the vessel where it is capable of expressing through you. In other words, well, let me tell you what happened. The man seemingly had a miracle happen right after this. The man with the business loss, investment loss. Another buyer came along, and his attorney was utterly, jaw on the floor like a pelican, couldn't make sense of how this happened. But some buyer randomly came along and offered him all the money he put in and more to. So another buyer came in and bought everything that this man put into that enterprise, investment, whatever, and then some, because he changed what he was thinking and feeling in his state. Now, when Lona had to go through, Lona, she had to go through the qualifying of the experience, if you will. That's what I'm going to call it. You qualify your experience with perception of God's insight versus human awareness. And her state was trusting God. In other words, she was surrendered in a state of total trust to God. She trusted her life to God. Well, that's what allowed her to be the conduit, to know the truth that set her free. This is powerful, powerful stuff. So the two things you have to do is you have to change the narrative so that it aligns with what God knows to be true. Hold on to that narrative and then transform yourself into the state of answering this question. Who would you be being right now if you didn't have the problem? Then you take a forward step in faith as if, well, that's me right now. In this moment, I am transformed and I am renewed in this moment. Your life in Christ doesn't have a personal history. You step out of personal history into the freeness of atonement, which means you don't have time anymore. You are simply just reflecting what God eternally is, that unchanging good, and you're allowing the unchanging good to clean up all of... Okay, I took a break in the action, and I'm going to head to church over here, okay? I told you, church is the structure of love, and where we're going to go is we are going to go to the pier, and we're going to go to where I minister. Because I want you to have the beauty of the message that will beautifully transform your experience as we go into this more deeply. You're starting to get it. You're starting to get this. Soon you'll be applying it. Now, I also want to let you know that giving richly is the secret to being rich. If you want to transform your state and money's the issue, you need to give richly. God loves a generous giver, and there's no greater investment that you can make than to put it into the kingdom. If you like this transmission, you can sow your seed of faith at MatthewDavidHurtado.com. Now, I want to speak to that for just a quick second. This is a little segue in the transmission. Many people may say, well, you're just trying to get money from people. I'm actually trying to get money to people. I'm serious about this. There are probably, I'm going to be realistically speaking with you, probably very few that watch this transmission that have manifested as much as I've been able to do over the past 10, 12 years, okay? And that was from all different ways and facets of looking at it. But there was one thing that I really did. There was one thing that actually worked. It was my faith in God and my tithing, my non-judgment, my following the fastest path to my joy. The 3-2-1 prosperity formula that I teach at the website.
All glory to God. I am trying to help those who haven't learned this lesson to really gain the advantage and the freedom that this lesson will give you. Do you know that if you want to hear the thoughts of God, if you want to be in the presence of the presence, you have to liberate yourself from all of the constant noise and concerns and cares that this world constantly foists upon you. There is no better way to do that than to adhere to scriptural law. And I've talked about it again and again. You could probably see 10 different videos to just raise your faith before you give. And when you do, know that you can't give to anybody but yourself. It enters your future and multiplies. Okay, segue complete. The man, he had his business restored. Now, wasn't the way he thought it was going to look, but it doesn't matter. He got into the thinking capacity of truth, and he got into the state change necessary for that truth to pour through him, for the light to just radiate right through that template. He provided the template for that new demonstration. See, the old template that the light is shining no matter what. Everything is light. But the old template was filled with his own self-reservation, his own sense of loss, and he was thinking in terms of a human history. Oh, look what happened 5 years ago. I made this investment, and 10 years ago I had this other fallout, and it sure smells like the same problem, and it sure feels like, and he's just thinking and feeling, okay, from a human perspective, create war, all right? I learned that from someone very, very intelligent, okay? Thinking and feeling from human awareness is what creates war. What creates peace is spiritual sense and reflection of divine truth. Now, Lona, okay, she demonstrated the first of all, the phenomenon that came upon her in human awareness was phenomenon. She didn't know what to make of it at first glance. She thought she was dreaming. She thought a fish hook went through her head in a dream. She woke up, looked in the mirror, and her head was all swollen. Well, in the dream that she was sleeping in, a fish hook went through, and in her waking dream, because she was awake at a funeral of the five senses, she saw another dream, a dream that her physical head was swelling. Neither one of those were the true report of what God was doing, what the light is. The light is just light, and it contains all of those qualities I described, the fruits of the Spirit, and it doesn't contain any of that other malicious stuff, like lack, poverty, sin, loss, any of those things. They don't exist in the light. Now, it says in the Nag Hammadi Library in the Gospel of Truth that the shadow of matter, the darkness pursued those because of the light. Because they had turned away from God and sinned. Get it? Because of the light, everything came into being. Period. But the darkness pursues those who have sinned, who've turned away from the principle. They've created another narrative, another meaning. They bought into a lie. The suggestion from the lying carnal mind of five-sense reality sold them a fictional pipe dream, and by fear, they worshipped it. And they gave another god power. Not Lona, though. Lona said, oh. Another lady said, you know what happened to you? You got bit by a scorpion. It's a deadly thing, and it probably will kill you. And she said, oh, is that all it is? Now, see, instantly, she did one critical thing. She did not allow her state of trusting in God, pure trust in God, letting God govern all of its own life, its own affairs. and her just being the willing and obedient vessel for that goodness to just radiate through. She didn't move off of her peg. She stood there, stood still. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. She didn't leave that position. Yeah, it probably was maybe a little bit of a test, right? Because it's quite an alarming suggestion. It's really throwing the kitchen sink at her and saying, listen, this time, I promise you, this is the real deal. I know the last 1,001 times, you've been able to stand still and this has gone away, but not this time. And what you need to know is that every time it's all one thing. It's all the same thing. It's all nothing. It's the impersonal nothing. And so the first thing you do, and what she did, is she impersonalized the evil as exactly what it is. It's an impersonal nothing. It's a shadow. It's a myth because it doesn't exist in the light. And the Nag Hammadi library says it came because of the light for those who had sinned and turned against. But see, here's the idea. Lona didn't sin, and she wasn't thinking of this, so how did it pop into her screen of awareness? Well, the late Phineas Parkhurst Quimby had a good saying for this. He said, man is a medium for wisdom or error. And he said, minds mingle. So here we are. We're, I guess you could say, like tuning forks, walking around, and all of these waves and these fluctuations in the field, when you see these little ripples in the water, these little fluctuations in the quantum field is the same thing as thought substance. We're just looking at what appears to be physical water. But these fluctuations in the field are sending currents of vibration through. And our boat can rock, like the disciples that got scared in the boat. And what did Jesus say? He said, calm down, you of little faith. Well, what happened was those ripples came into, they came through Lona's boat, and she wasn't one of the scared disciples. She was actually of great faith, so she was calm to begin with. And that's why her demonstration was so rapid, okay? And so let's think about the two things that you work with here is you have knowledge capacity, and then you have, out of the heart come the issues of life, you have your state. Well, her state remained in a state of trust, in a state of faithfulness to one principle, one power, one God, and that is the unchanging good, period. She knew that, and she leaned upon that, and she corrected the sight of all of those suggestions coming from out there. The doctor said, this is what's going to happen. The other person on the plane said, this is what's going to happen. Everybody told her what was going to happen according to their understanding. Well, let every man be a liar, but every word out of the mouth of God true. She must have known that too, because she held on to what God knew, no matter what everybody said. And she never let her state move into fear, into worshiping another God. And therefore, she remained open as a conduit for the light itself to demonstrate that it alone is all in all. She dissolved the error because it was nothing, just a fleeting thought stream that was going to ripple through and do nothing to her. Her life could never be touched by that. Only the personal sense of self can ever be scared in the boat when the waves come and crash against the boat. And Jesus comes into the boat and says, calm down, you of little faith. You see? Now remember that when you get agitated and troubled is, hey, calm down, you of little faith. Just calm yourself down. Don't you dare go into fear, and don't you dare worship another God. Don't do that. Don't break the commandment, because these graven images coming against you, it's the impersonal nothing. It's nothing. It doesn't matter what it is. I've told you stories about a guy who got shot in the chest. And, the Christian scientists come over and he prays for the guy, and every doctor that was there said he was going to die, and he was well within 3 days, completely healed. Another man fell from 300 feet in a parachute accident. Well, his chute didn't open from 300 feet. In the moment that he knew that his parachute wasn't going to open, he refused to fear. He did not go into fear. He held steadfast to this idea that God governs all, and that his life was as safe as God's. Can you imagine what it takes to hold fear at bay, to do that? Well, here's how you get to that place, is you have to build your own database of experiences by trusting God in everything. So you begin right now where you're at. You begin with whatever's at hand right now. Whatever seems to be troubling you, you start right here. You start right now. And you say, okay, here's the idea. What this appears to be as a troubling circumstance, condition, whatever it is, it's not the circumstance or condition that is the trouble. It's my thought about that person, that circumstance, that condition that is causing me trouble. That's the interpretation that's being made. That is a judgment that has to be, pay those debts. You have to pay those debts. That judgment has to be cleared. Take everything you think you saw, you think you heard, take all of your human history, all of your recounts of what you think happened that led up to it. And I want you to know one thing. The password is no cause. There is no cause to come into being that is outside of the eternal, unchanging good. There's no cause to come into being. None whatsoever. I don't care what you think happened that led up to the series of events that brought it about. In the sight of God, it never happened, and it never will. Just like Jesus, the man, was never hung on a cross. That was the 5 sense human perception of what the world mind said happened. But the demonstrated principle that Christ proved is that nothing could ever happen to God's child. And you have to prove that same principle. So as you think about the meaning that you've put on this idea that seems to be troubling you, back of that meaning, because it is a counterfeit, it's counterfeiting something that is true. Turn it around. Turn it around so that it reflects what is that is good, that reflects the pure mind of Christ. Turn it around. For example, you have a bill you can't pay. Oh no, the money's not there. You know, I lost the job 6 months ago, and then I had this happen and that happened, and it all led up to this series of events, and now look at this is what happened, and there's no money in the bank account, right? Liar. Carnal-minded liar. God's wealth is forever a fixed, eternal constant, and by reflection, man must have God's wealth at all times and can never be without God's wealth at hand. Now, as you turn your thought that direction, you may begin to say, well, this is really going against the stream here. Like, this takes a lot of paddling to get myself up the river, because I've got all this current and all this force swimming against me. I don't know if I want to do this. This is a lot of work. Well, then keep floating down the stream to where you're going then. Just keep floating down the lazy river and just fall off the cliff if you need to. All roads will lead to the same path. You just decide how you want to get there. I suggest you turn it around in your thought and recognize that it's not anything you have to do other than turn the thought around. You don't have to set up any set of force or resistance. You just have to change the template of thought. Okay, look, it may feel like 1,001, things that are insurmountable, and you're like, well, I just can't see any way out of this. I just can't see how anything good's going to ever happen here. There's this diagnosis, and there's this pain, and then there's this symptom, and it's been going on for this many months, and I've tried this and this and this and this, and you know what? I tell you, I've tried everything, Matthew, but nothing works, and this is hopeless. And I say to you, that's just the disciple in the boat, and the waves are crashing against it. And because of fear, You haven't demonstrated the fact of life because of fear, because of worshiping another god. You don't have a life of your own. When did you become human? Do you think you were born of a mother and father still of flesh? Well, then you're not getting out of that dream. You never entered a world that God didn't create, did you? Did God create sickness, sin, poverty, disease, aging, death, decline? Well, if he didn't create it, then you don't have to fear it. You say, well, what does that mean? What do I do? What's the truth? Well, God's unchanging quality of well-being, which is known to us as life, doesn't have an opposite. And, under the umbrella of that opposite would be all of the things that cause death. All of them. Heart disease, lung disease, cancer, all of the itises, all of the isms, whatever you want to call it, right? What do they all lead to? Well, they all lead to death. Well, life doesn't have an opposite. So there's no cause that leads to death because there's no death. Life doesn't have an opposite. That's why they go around saying, I speak life into your body. I speak life into your body. Because it is life. And life doesn't have an opposite. And you start to really just hold on to these ideas. Oh, life doesn't have an opposite. I never left heaven. I was never born of flesh. The eternal goodness is unchanging. Right where this problem seems to be, only God is here. God fills all space and left no room for anything else. And you see, you may find this, so I turn my thought around and I can do this and I can hold on to it, but my symptoms aren't going away. And I'll say, well, that's what you think. Because they never started. It's not your job to make anything happen in a realm that doesn't exist, or to fix anything that seems to be a problem when there is no problem. It's your job to continue to know the truth and to get into the state of trust and expectation and to begin to follow the breadcrumbs of hope that guide you into the self-discovery, because God alone is responsible for his children. And those steps will get you there. You turn to God, the thoughts of God, knowing only one mind, one principle, one power, one activity. You don't serve any other gods. You stop fearing what's going on out there. And then when you stop fearing what's going on out there, you open the channel for what is to become known through you, to you, as you, and all around you. See, getting those other gods out of the way by stopping fear itself, according to Mayor Baker Eddy, is 80% of the work. And then destroying the belief is, can two powers occupy the same space? Are there two powers? Did God create a false power that creates its own misery? No. So there's no adversary. There's no opposite to life. Well, are you in life? Well, if you aren't, step out of it and prove it. Well, you can't do that. Well, so I guess you're part of life then. Well, life governs itself. Principle. Life maintains its own harmony and well-being. And what competes with it is human thought. And what is that keeps erecting human thought? Fear. Superstition of materialism. Believing in a human history. Believing in a carnal life. Believing in what happened 5 years ago. Believing in what led up to the series of events that caused this so-called thing. There is no thing. You don't have to undo anything that is not. You only have to know what is. And you wrestle not against things of flesh, but principalities in places of spiritual power, if you will. You see? And you cause your own salvation by knowing the truth. That's your job, is to know the truth. It's God's job, life, spirit, truth, principle, to maintain itself. And it becomes self-aware through you when you stop setting up competing human thought. And the only reason you keep having competing human thought is because you're fearing something out there. You're giving other gods power because you're ascribing qualities of good and evil to conditions of matter in time and space that are nothing, because there is nothing out there. It's an empty carcass. You don't have a physical body. You identify with one through human belief, and it is the very human belief itself that is in question. And you can apply this to your business. You can apply it to your well-being. You can apply it to your love life, to your romantic interests. I will jokingly say that I hold the world record for online dating. I do, because when I did online dating, I knew the principle of love was forever with me and couldn't be anything separated from me, and that everywhere I go, I can only reflect the love that is, and it's always coming in to greet me. And so I just stand in that firm faith and pop up into the scene, and instantly the demonstration shows up, and I'm like, oh, there we go. And then I'm done. I'm not kidding you. I literally have experienced in 2 times that I've done the so-called online dating thing. I popped up, and within 24 hours, I instantly demonstrated what I was seeking. The second time, within less than an hour. Now, it's not because I'm, writing the best sales copy in the world or standing out amongst, 50,000 other people. It's because I don't recognize any other people. I don't recognize any other condition that is obstructing anything that already is. I'm just demonstrating what already is by knowing no other. Now, that's not something I'm bragging about, but I'm telling you that applies to everything. I've had times I've had to look at financial mountains, and I'd had to say, oh my goodness. And then I had to come sober and realize, what problem? Wherein, God, does there exist a problem? And how can God's manifest reflection, which is me, experience something God didn't have? And then I would have to turn within myself and say, what human belief created this problem? And since you're asking, guess what? You'll receive. You'll sense, oh, what? It's something I heard this 3 years ago, and somebody pitched me an idea that there was this monster out there, and it was gonna, it was gonna cause me to have all my money erode and this and that, and and there was this battle, and it just comes up with this story. And again, minds mingle, and man is the instrument or the medium of wisdom or error. And in that moment, I'm the disciple in the boat, and I'm like, we're so scared, the waves are coming. And Jesus has to come in the boat. Calm down, you have little faith. You weren't there 3 years ago. Nothing was there but God. What are you talking about? What happened to God? Well, nothing happened to God, but it happened to me. Oh, so you exist outside of God now. Oh, that's a good story right there. Let's tell that story. You exist outside of God's reflection. Okay. Well, have fun with that. And so as long as you keep thinking along those lines, as if you exist outside of God's reflection, you'll come up with all of your human reasons of what you think you ought to do. You'll use all of your human will to create more problems where they don't exist, creating side effects where you're trying to solve problems, you create multiple other problems. And you keep doing all of this human reasoning that is the very trap in and of itself. And all you ever had to do is know no other gods. Know no other power. And have no graven images. Turn those graven image thoughts around to their spiritual truths by rejecting them. Yeah, okay. So, supply and demand are in a constant equilibrium in God's creation. And there's always harmonious relating within all of God's members. And there is no hostile attack from out there because God only pursues his man with love. Oh, and by the way, you never lived a life in flesh, and the only thing that's ever been here was God. And the only thing that ever will show up is good, because there's nothing else that was ever created. And you begin to apply that knowledge to your discordant thought, the old narrative, the old ideas that keep coming up, trying to keep you recycling that garbage so you stay right where you are. And you fix that first, and then you look at your state and you say, okay, you do a body scan and you say, okay, in this body, is there any darkness of fear? And just bring light to that area. Literally, you can imagine a pure white light going right to that area and just dissolving that pocket of fear that seems to be stuck. And waiting on the Lord to reveal the spiritual truth or the antidote to that fear. And ask yourself the question, if this problem, who would I be being? Who would I be being right now if this problem did not exist? Start to imagine that. Oh, okay. Who would I be being if this problem didn't exist? Start to imagine that. Who would I be being if this problem didn't exist? Keep on imagining that. Well, what am I doing? I'm changing the story. I'm changing the thought picture. I'm changing the narrative. And what's that going to do? Well, it's going to allow me to rest in peace, be dead to the world, so I can stay alive in spirit in my imagination. Because my imagination is the real. And I'm clearing it in the level of spirit now, instead of going out there to fix the world of effect, which is nothing, no cause. I'm going to the realm of spirit, which is all substance. And I'm saying, who would I be being right now if this problem didn't exist? And then I assume that right now. And I walk forward in faith, totally transformed in the newness of Christ by recognizing that since Christ doesn't have the problem, I can be the reflection of Christ who lives without the problem. And by being in the Christ, I am now the new man. I am no longer the old sinning mortal that tries to create a life outside of life's complete governance by holding in its own awareness an abstract deviation that is nothing but error, lies, misconceptions born of material superstition, fiction, illusion, dream. None of it ever happened. Think on those things.